Hello, 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 and good evening, Mr. John O'Donovan. How are you doing? Welcome, I suppose, to your show at this point, episode 1 of 3 Drams Live. What is going on, sir? How are you doing?
I'm very good, Matt, and I'm glad to say we made it after a long journey getting to this point. We finally launched the website, we launched the club, we launched the subscriptions, and I've probably had the weirdest week of my life, I would say, to date. So as you know, Matt, last Wednesday we were lucky enough to be considered to appear on the Late Late Show on RTE television. This wasn't planned. I got a phone call on Wednesday, a day before the big Dingle single pot still 4 launch, to say that we were shortlisted to feature on live TV, and to say that my stomach turned would be an understatement. So they didn't give me the final word until late on Thursday to come to Dublin Friday to do the show. So what a week. I wanted to come on here, Matt, at the beginning to genuinely thank everybody inside and outside the whiskey community for the support that has been thrown in our direction over the last week. We kind of feel as though we have now an obligation to deliver the best whiskey tasting club that there is. So a genuine heartfelt thanks to everybody for joining tonight. I can see already there's plenty of people on here, so thank you. And thank you as well, Matt, for hosting this episode as well.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem. I'm delighted to be with the nationwide famous 3 Drams. I even got the nice little shirt going on here. Like this is wonderful. And as a few people have pointed out, I do have some nice light show going on behind me. I had to bring out the big guns for episode 1 to give it a little zazz to the. Listen, I'm up here competing with Tuberty. You know, it's a tall order. You know. Not just the fact he's probably about a foot taller than me anyway, but he's got the house band, he's got the show lights. You know, I got to do something. But I was seeing an absolute mountain of people coming through here on the comments. And it's actually great to seeing a huge amount of people coming through on the YouTube side as well, which is absolutely fantastic to have them on really the first interaction of the lives through YouTube for 3 Drams. So it's great to have everyone on. And at this point, actually, there's so many coming through. I really can't. I really can't get to all of them. But I'm seeing comments coming in from Sweden, Germany, all across Ireland. I'm seeing some of the lads in the US, some of the usual people we expect from the great, fantastic whiskey community, and so many new people as well. So I welcome everyone to this tasting. One of the big things about this is we're going to meet some absolutely fantastic makers of the whiskeys we're trying this evening, which is going to be fantastic. But this format is really all about interacting and engaging. So if you guys have any questions as we go along, please ask in the comments. We'll pull up all the relevant questions to ask, to put to the makers of the whiskeys. And more so, if you've never been to an online whiskey tasting or you've never been to a whiskey tasting before, also let us know. And we'll celebrate the fact if you have any questions. There's no question too basic. There's no question. Well, there might be a couple of questions too complicated, but but I'm sure that all of our guests will have no issues with those. So John, I suppose is there much else to say to the people out there? A big thank you. The kits themselves are great.
One or two other things, Matt. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance. Ryan cut me off at the end. I didn't get a chance to mention Luxbox Ireland, who have created our little plinths. Now, because of the demand, we've gone out of stock for now. We're going to have them back in a couple of weeks. But thank you to Luxbox Ireland. They've done a great job on our little plinths, which are something pretty cool. You get to put your 3 little drams in there every month and share. I see some amazing images coming through tonight on Twitter. So keep it up. The other thing, Matt, is we have these little whiskey tasting journals. So the whole point of this whiskey tasting club is you want to, I suppose, educate your palate, learn as you go along. This is just a little token where you can record the tasting notes. There's also a flavor wheel, okay? And the instructions to use the flavor wheel are also in the front of it. So for any of you who've got your hands on one of these little journals, if you fill them out tonight and fill in the tasting wheel, put a photo up on Instagram or on Facebook and tag us. And it's going to be really interesting to try to compare the different tasting notes, based on, we'll take one of the whiskeys featured tonight and we'll look at everybody's tasting notes and we'll see if there was actually a pattern that emerged from the tasting notes. Obviously, tasting is subjective, but could be an interesting little thing. The other second thing I want to mention, Matt, for everybody who has subscribed, there will be an email sent out after the show with some special kind of member offers and member pricing on some of the featured whiskies. So keep an eye on your inboxes. That is for the people who are now active subscribers of 3 Drams. The only other thing I want to say, Matt, is for anybody who may be watching this who's not yet a member or is somewhat interested in it, get over to 3drams.com and have a look. If you have any questions, there's a FAQ section, frequently asked questions, on the website where we've covered an awful lot of the frequently asked questions. And if you can't find an answer there, send us a message on Instagram or on Facebook. So that's kind of it for me, Matt. Really just to say thanks, those few bits. And now I'm going to join the audience and fill out my little journal here.
Yeah, I say before you go, we have a lot of people coming in. The John Kumi actually asked where are the kits available from the moment you were telling us where the kits were available from. So I think that was he asked just before you and you answered it without even seeing the question. So I thought that was very serendipitous. There's also Olivia King has joined in saying it's her first whiskey tasting session.
Hello,
so Olivia, welcome along. We're going to have a lot of fun this evening. We'll walk you through the steps for anyone who wants to join us for the first time. This is open to all people of all experience of whiskey. And I say to you, John, that you're doing playing a blinder. I'm only here as MC. I am not a part of the official 3 Drams family. So it is a serious product, and you guys drive a fantastic consumer-focused business. I don't know if there's anyone with a better consumer report or even attention to the consumers than yourself. So congratulations.
Really
and I know this will come up as well. I see it in the comments, and I had a little play with the comments there a second ago as well. Like our last tasting with the precursor to episode 1, the final test, we have 2 people with very similar names. We have Mr. Dave Cummins, Irish brand ambassador for Dingle whiskey. And we also have David Cummings, who I think monikers himself as the handsome Dave Cummins. We're going to have some fun with this. For anyone that doesn't know, there's the precursor to what I imagine is going to be a comment war in the comments on Facebook. But we'll have a lot of fun with it. This whole thing is meant to be laid back and informative. And the laid back comes from me. The informative comes from our fantastic guests on the show. So for everyone who has a tasting kit at home in front of them, you should have yourself set up like this. If you have a little tasting plinth, we are going to go chronologically. John has set it up in a very easy way that I don't think anyone's really going to get too confused. You do have your tasting notes and a little background information there as well. So for everyone who's out there, get your sample number 1 at the ready, because we will be welcoming our first whiskey. We'll be talking about our first whiskey now. So John, I'm going to say a little goodbye to you, and I'm going to be welcoming Mr. Graham Coull, Master Distiller of Dingle Distillery. Sir, let me pull this down. Welcome. There we go. Perfect. How are we doing?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm delighted to have you. I am actually sitting here. I always, I suppose, start myself off with a wee tashkon of something in the glass before we get going. I actually decided to treat myself to dip into my Dingle Single Malt Batch 1 bottle this evening, just to throw my mind back a little bit, just to where the distillery started, and now we're going to taste the latest release of where we've come. So I suppose for everyone out there who doesn't know you and of the new people, I suppose give us an idea of your role and why a man with such a lovely lilt as your own is making whiskey in Dingle in West Kerry.
I thought you were going to say with such a lovely shirt. A new shirt for the occasion tonight. Always like to impress. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, not not a hint of Irish in my blood, I don't think. Well, not that I've found out yet, but you never know. No, my history is that I spent 25 years in Scotland making whiskey at Glenfiddich and Balvenie distilleries before moving on to Glenmurray Distillery, and then just over a year ago made the move across the water to Dingle.
And we have the first comment in on the shirt there from Stephen Randall saying, a nice shirt, Graham. I knew there was going to be one comment. I was keeping an eye out for it. So I suppose what really enticed you to move from the lovely, I suppose, town of Elgin, where you've been making some fantastic world-renowned single malt Scotch whiskies, to come down to what must be at this point one of the coolest independent distilleries in the country?
Yeah, I think it probably had been bubbling under for a year or so, probably 18 months. You know, I'd been keeping an eye on the Irish whiskey scene and getting in tow with some kind of undesirables on Twitter that I now try and avoid, but they still try and stalk me. But yeah, so I became more aware of what was happening in Irish whiskey at that time. And to be fair, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have known anything at all. If you'd asked me what pot still was, I wouldn't have known the answer. And some would say I still don't know the answer. But,
well, thank God we're talking about pot still this evening.
I know. I've been swatting up. But yeah, so, you know, it's such an exciting time for Irish whiskey in general. And to be able to join distillery like Dingle, which is, you know, we're now 7, almost 8 years into the distillery life. You know, it's a really exciting time to join a distillery and hopefully steer it for the next sort of 5, 10, 15 years and really get, you know, Dingle on the map as a mature whiskey. Absolutely.
Before we jump into the actual whiskey itself, because I know we do have a number of people who are on this tasting for the first time, might be their first time with Irish whiskey. In some cases, it's first time at a whiskey tasting altogether. What advice would you have for people that are taking their kind of first dive into the whiskies this evening?
I think, you know, well, this is a great way to get into whiskey and try 3 different whiskies, which, you know, would cost you a reasonable amount of money to go out and buy the bottles. And they, you know, to be honest, they may not be all to your taste. But so it's a good way to try it. Don't expect to like everything. Go with your gut instincts. If you taste it, knows it, and you think it's a little bit fiery or strong, then it's probably going to take some water. And don't be afraid to add water. The worst thing you can do is add too much, and you learn that it tastes a little bit too bland and watery. So don't be frightened of it. Don't listen to anybody else either. Go with your own thoughts. It's a drink to be enjoyed. I think we study it to death almost. Instead of just getting on with drinking it, enjoying it, and if you can enjoy it with people around you, it's a social drink, and you can discuss your own thoughts with them as well.
Exactly, as you said, you know, you can always add more water. It's very difficult to take it out of the glass once it's in. Yeah. And like you said, like taste is subjective. Have a nose, and also, you know, when we talk about tasting notes with any of the guests tonight, and actually this lineup is really cool because we're going to talk about a pot still Irish whiskey, we're going to talk about a single malt at cask strength, and we're going to talk about a peated Irish whiskey. So really, we're running the gambit on Irish whiskies here. But I think it's quite cool. So if everyone wants to have, I'm going to put away my batch 1 and pick up my lovely other branded Dingle glass. If we want to take number 1 from our little tasting kits here, hopefully the camera will be able to focus in on that. Number 1, I don't know if people needed the visual cue, but I'm going to give it to them anyway. While I'm pouring this and while everyone else is pouring it, why don't you give us a little background onto the actual distillation, I suppose, you know, mash bills and the distillation methods that go into making these pot stills?
Yeah, so pot still is different from single malt. Single malt is made from malted barley and malted barley only, whereas pot still you're allowed to introduce other cereals into the mash, which is the beginning of the process where you extract the sugar from the cereals. So So in the mash tun, you can combine malted barley with generally unmalted barley being the other component, but you can add other things like rye and oats as well. You must have a minimum 30% of either the malted barley or the unmalted barley, and otherwise you can add what you like. But for this one, it's a 50-50 mix of malted barley and unmalted barley, and the malted barley gives you the sugar, gives you the extract, whereas you could argue the unmalted barley gives you the uniqueness that pot still is, because once you get the sugar out and ferment it into your beer or wash, then for this pot still it's distilled 3 times, and at the end of that you got a lovely clear spirit, which is completely different from a single malt spirit. There's an oiliness there, a creaminess, and generally a spiciness as well. So for me, pot still has a bit more character at the beginning, a bit like a peated whiskey. It has something there at the beginning that the single malt doesn't have. So it starts its life with an advantage, I suppose.
Well, as Kevin Heather said on the comments here we go. I suppose is a good place to start. Sir, I'm going to say cilantro to you, but before I do that, we're going to have a little nose of it first. Take in your impressions of what's going on. If you do have your 3 Drams notebook, do make sure to jot down your thoughts on the nose. And then I suppose at that point, have a nose, and then we'll take our first sips and see what happens on the palate. So, sir, cilantro?
Cilantro. So I suppose it's worth pointing out now that after triple distillation, then the spirit is matured for a period of time in casks, and for this Dingle expression now we're up to around about the 6-year-old mark, and within this Dingle pot still, the 4th release, it's a combination of bourbon casks and Oloroso sherry casks. So they've matured on their own for the 6 years, and then I've combined them at the point just before bottling.
So they're essentially independently matured in those casks and then vatted at the end. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm also going to unplug this light behind me because the Tuberty style disco lights was going really well at the beginning, but it's actually distracting me, and I'm sure it's distracting a lot of people at the home. What would be the kind of percentages between the bourbon cask and the sherry cask that go into a release like this? And then as someone actually asked, and then how does that differ from the other pot still releases Dingle would have been bringing out?
Yeah, so over the years, Dingle has released 4 pot still releases, and they've all had their different component mix. They've all been, generally a combination of more than one cask type. That certainly helps when the whiskey is younger to get different flavors in there from the bourbon and the sherry or port or whatever it may be. So within this one, it's 27% Oloroso sherry and 73% ex-bourbon. I played around with roughly plus or minus 5% on the sherry on this, just seeing where the sweet spot was, because what you've got, the sherry cask is quite dominant. If you saw it on its own, it's got dark colour, it's quite a heavy character to it. There's a slight bitterness there as well. So to use too much of it, it can overcast the bourbon cask, which is a much lighter flavour. You're more toffee and vanilla from your bourbon cask. So I played around with the percentages just to hit the spot that I thought was right for that particular age of whiskey.
And would you generally use the bourbon casks in your whiskies as the kind of backbone of the release, assuming you weren't doing a whole maturation in sherry or so?
They tend to have been just now. Up to now, well, we've got a cask policy of filling around about 40% into bourbon and 40% into sherry. So that gives me the opportunity to play tunes with the mix. I could go very heavily on the bourbon side, or I could go very heavy on the sherry as well. But at this moment in time, it kind of works to have a slightly more bourbon edge to the whiskey than sherry. But it's down to taste as well. There'll be people on this shouting at me that it should be all sherry, and there'll be people at me shouting that it should be all bourbon. and there'll be a certain individual shouting that it should be cask strength as well.
Oh, we wouldn't know who that'd be now. Don't worry.
No, I don't know who that man.
I've seen a lot of different people coming through on the comments about the tasting notes, which is quite good. Apologies, I'm having a little issue with my mouse here. But I'm getting a lot of the kind of vanillas coming through, sweetness, butterscotch. Actually, quite an interesting one here, a Black Forest kind of cherry nose. Then there's just, of course, Alan Crow coming in with fantastic whiskey, which I think I'd have to agree with. I do enjoy the Dingle tasting notes as well. But a feast of desserts, sticky toffee pudding, Black Forest Gatto, butterscotch ice cream. I mean, I think that really does kind of depict a lot of what's going on in the glass here. There is that lovely kind of sweetness. There's a creaminess to the pot still as well.
And I would say, again, if you're fairly new to whiskey, don't get too hung up about tasting notes. I write them in a way to really generate the imagination rather than be completely, an example of the whiskey that how it noses or tastes. So they're really there just to give you an idea, and you can use tasting notes to give you a clue as to what casks have been used. If it isn't said on the bottle, so if you're seeing vanilla and toffee, then that will be a bourbon cask, and then if you see dark chocolate, dark fruits, or whatever, then that's probably more a sherry or a wine cask. So it does generally gives you a clue.
Absolutely. I'm getting some nice comments here as well. Some people very much enjoying the kind of oiliness and the viscosity of the mouthfeel as well. Which do you find a big difference between pot still and malt whiskies for that kind of oiliness and mouthfeel?
I do, and especially at this age, whether it'll be interesting to see, as Dingle gets older, how the two types of whiskey differ or become more similar. But yeah, at this stage, it's almost got an earthy character to it, and definitely the mouthfeel, the creaminess there, and on the finish, which is when you've drunk the whiskey and it's that lingering taste or feeling in your mouth, then that finish is generally quite spicy with the pot still. So you get a longer lasting taste experience from pot still compared to the single malt.
Absolutely, I think that's a very fair comparison. And just on the ABV 46.5, how does, I suppose, as a distiller and then also in the blending roles, how do you come to the ABV of any release apart from the cask strengths?
Yeah, generally your whiskey will obviously start its life out of the cask at cask strength, which at this age will be up near 60%, which is pretty hefty to be drinking at that strength. You can then choose to reduce the strength to whatever, down to a minimum of 40%. But if you're 46% and above, you get away with not having to filter as much the whiskey. So there's an argument there that you leave a bit more of the character in the whiskey and don't strip out any flavor. So 46, it could be 46, 46 and a half, could be 47. It's not that precise a science that 46 and a half is the sweet spot, but around that mark is a nice strength to enjoy the whiskey, because it can still then take a little bit of water if you so desire to add, and just see how it feels, because adding water will change the whiskey completely.
Yeah. And anyone, we're coming to a nice natural end on dram number 1 for the evening. A lot of questions coming through though, and if you do have any questions for Graham or about the Dingle whiskies, fire them in right now. This is your chance to engage and have fun with asking. Andrew Kennedy wants to know, in the future releases, the pot still range will be a larger volume of cask strength bottles. Now, I know the cask strength bottles this year was the inaugural cask strength for the pot still, and they tend to be 500 to kind of reflect the 500 founding fathers. But will we see that change in the coming years, or is that trend going to continue?
It will. Across the board in Dingle, you will see more cask strength being released. You'll see more releases as well, especially on single malt. We have more single malt volume than pot still. So instead of the one traditional release a year, hopefully next year we'll be maybe looking at certainly 2, maybe 3 releases in the year, plus a pot still. So yeah, there's, let's say, there is a demand out there for cask strength. So we hopefully will try and please a few more people at least.
I'm sure a lot of people are pleased already with the releases. John McCarthy has a question. He wants to know, do you mature the barrels in Dingle or do you mature them inland? And I think it's quite a good question.
Yeah, I mean, they're matured in Dingle. The warehouse is if anybody's been to the distillery, the warehouse is a mile inland from the distillery. So yes, they're matured inland, but they are matured in Dingle.
There's a nice provenance to it as well. And if you go to the Dingle Distillery, there's a very kind of genuine and romantic feel to people. What people think of distilleries when you visit Dingle, you get that real feel of and there's no discredit to any other distilleries. Just in some places you have large facilities, and other places are very kind of automated and heavily industrialized. Whereas Dingle, I think, has a very interesting tactile craft. It's it's a manual distillery. It's and I know you do have some barrels on site as well, particularly for the founding fathers. And if I'm not wrong, all bottles are hand bottled then in Dingle as well.
Yeah, everything is done by hand. There's no automation within the distillery. The casks are filled by hand, and the bottling line is within the distillery as well. So everything is done on site from start to finish, which is a nice thing. It's certainly not the most efficient way to do things, but it just goes to give Dingle its unique character.
I am aware that we are pressed on time, but I do see some really good questions coming in. So I'm going to take 3 more questions, and then, sir, I'll let you run off. I know Faye will be whipping you off the live stream. I'm sure she's got lots of things for you to do around the house, and if not around the distillery. But
Scotland playing tonight, and they've got a chance to make Euro qualifiers. So that's what you've got to do.
I was going to say you probably got one eye under the telly. So Alan McAvoy wants to know, any plans for Peated Dingle? Now, I know the answer to this a little bit ahead of time, but I'm delighted that someone's asked it. So, sir, Peated Dingle whiskies.
Yeah, definitely. I made Peated Spirit at Glenfiddich for the first time there. I started Peated Spirit at Glenmurray, and this year made some Peated single malt at Dingle as well. So yes, and hopefully, give it Peated again. You're drinking Peated later on. You can drink generally Peated whiskies younger than a non-Peated. So hopefully, 4 or 5 years from now, you'll see something out there.
We do have one question in from Greg, and he wants to know what the background is, the character on the logo, the wee ran boy. I know it is a very local tradition. I don't know if have you experienced a Rans Day yet down in Dingle?
No, not yet. It's a kind of pagan symbol, pagan festival, where they basically dress up and try and ward off evil spirits, I think. But I think now it's just an excuse to go out and have a drink. So
yeah, it is. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's St. Stephen's Day, or what you would know as Boxing Day. And the head of it is a straw hat, and it kind of morphed a little bit. If you go further up the coast or into the east coast of the US, you'll find mummers will have a similar-ish tradition that kind of blends as well. And December 26th in Dingle in non-pandemic times is possibly the most out of control, in a nice way, thing I've ever seen in my life. It is a sight to behold. And then I'll just finish off here. That actually a few people have asked this. Just in general, what kind of age can we expect? I know it's a non-age statement, single pot still, but if you give a kind of a general age range, what would we be looking at for the pot still?
You're looking at 6 years old for this one. Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Component 6 years old.
Well, sir, we might have some more questions coming through, but perhaps John can send those on to you, or maybe we can get Beardy Dave can answer some of the questions in the comments as they come up a little bit later on. But for you, sir, I thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you have so many things to be doing on an evening such as tonight, such as watching Scotland play. I've always delight having you on any show, whether it's my show or on the Three Drams show. So thank you very much. And for anyone who, if you have multiple glasses, keep the sample with you or a little bit in your bottle. We will be moving on to Dram Iveragh number 2. So to everyone else, get prepped up. To you, sir, thank you very much. And I hope you have a lovely evening. Please feel free to watch in backstage.
I will do. No, and thanks to everyone for joining in. Thank you. Cheers.
Perfect. So we are moving on to what has been one of the, I suppose, most exciting releases of recent months. Now, everything that we're trying tonight is a recent release. I will tag that on. But this is something that's come out of Bushmills that is an exclusive for Ireland. This is the sample number 2. This is Bushmills 2008 Muscatel cask of the Causeway series. And I'm delighted to be joined by Miss Helen Mulholland. Helen, absolutely huge welcome to the show. You are, well, as I said, when we were backstage a little bit earlier on, I've never had the opportunity to interview you before, so I'm very excited. But for the people at home who don't know you and don't know, I suppose, your role within Bushmills, can you give us a little bit of information as to what you do, and I suppose what you do within Bushmills, the fantastic distillery that it is?
Yeah, good evening, Matt, and hello to everybody at home. As you say, my name's Helen Mulholland. I'm the master blender at the old Bushmills Distillery. I've been with Bushmills for nearly 30 years. I started as a student and never left. I think whenever you see Bushmills, you realise why it is. Whenever you actually come around the corner onto the site, it's whitewashed buildings, it's stone buildings. It's a magical, magical place. And again, myself and nearly everybody else at Bushmills has been there for 30, 40 years and we never leave. I'm lucky to be the blender there, so I get to work with all the fabulous casks that we have on site. We hold many 100,000 casks at Bushmills. And I have the joy of working with them and creating some of the lovely single malts we'll see tonight. Absolutely.
So I suppose one of the things that I'm interested in, because it's my understanding that that you essentially joined, forgive me if I'm wrong, you've something along the lines of a biochemistry background and you joined kind of straight out of college, and much to the kudos of Bushmills. People don't really seem to leave Bushmills. When you get in at into the bones of it, people tend to seem to really cling on and stay in Bushmills. They seem to enjoy the work that they do.
That's correct. I'm a food technologist by education, although whether that could really be true or not is another thing. So yes, I started Bushmills as part of an industrial placement on my university course. And it was the placement that everybody wanted. And I was incredibly lucky that I managed to get it. I had never drank whiskey before. I had never actually been in the distillery before until I arrived as a student, and never left. I think it's an incredible industry to be in, and anybody out there that's thinking about trying to join the industry, biochemistry, food technology, chemical engineering, all of those routes create a wonderful way to enter the industry. So I've been there nearly 30 years. You learn something new every single day. And it is, I get paid to create things like this. I mean, what other job, can do that? Without doubt, it's the best job in the world.
I would have to agree. It sounds like one of the best jobs anyone could really think of at that point. Before we jump in, one thing I was hoping to ask you was, for the people out there that are doing their, I suppose, who are joining us for their first time, on a whiskey tasting, or perhaps an Irish whiskey tasting, or just an online whiskey tasting, do you perhaps have a story or remember your first whiskey tasting? And if you say you've never tasted whiskey before joining Bushmills, it must have been in the old Bushmills distillery. It would have been the first time you had a whiskey tasting.
It was. I say I had never tasted whiskey until I arrived at Bushmills. I was really lucky that my first whiskey tasting was actually when I was learning to become a taste panelist. So I've disappeared.
You have. I don't know what happened there. There's someone clicked a little button and then we moved along, but I apologize. We got you back up.
So yes, so I was trained by actually one of the best master blenders in the business. So the first thing I learned was about all the flavors, about all the tastes, about all the textures. And again, like everybody here, it's all about how you feel about the whiskey and how you want to taste the whiskey. I believe that everybody should actually just enjoy whiskey the way they want to enjoy it. Probably, like Graham said, if it's their first sort of venture into whiskey, I do an awful lot. The vast majority of my work I do on the nose. So again, smell it, see if you like it, and then also, if you wish to add water, possibly. I mean, the Bushmills we're tasting tonight is cask strength. That's over 56%. So again, maybe just add a small drop of water. It releases the tension in the glass and allows the flavors to come out, and it allows you then to pick the strength that you want to taste at.
And if you're in the lab doing sensory analysis, what ABV would you normally, I suppose, nose casks samples at?
I actually work at 20%.
I was just gonna say, I enjoy asking blenders that question because everyone has a number that they like to work with, but it's usually in that 20 to 30% range, I find, at least.
Yeah, it's exactly because you can pick up small notes, small nuances at that sort of strength, whereas at the higher strength, it becomes more difficult to just pick out those minute details. So I always work at 20% when I'm in the lab.
Oh, okay. And I suppose before we jump into the glass, and for anyone that hasn't already taken sample number 2, if you do want to throw it into your glass, but I will say, and I say throw, be more gentle with the spirit of Ireland and I say this is going to be the only time this happens. I have a branded glass for every distillery we're talking to tonight, and I am delighted to be able to use them all. This never happened before, and it'll never happen again. But I enjoy it in my Causeway glass. Do pour some into your glass gently. And do have a nose, but I will ask you all to join us in imbibing in a moment. But I want to ask one question just before we do. You said you're at Bushmills for a lovely part, I suppose, most of your working career. But you would have also likely have seen the change of ownership from Irish distillers and worked under, I'm sure, Billy Lighton and David Quinn, and then moved into the kind of Diageo days, and then now we're into the Casa Cuervo kind of part of the Bushmills history. Has there been, I suppose, for on the ground any large, or noticeable changes, or has it been very much, no matter whom was at the helm, the day-to-day in the distillery has been very much the same?
Yeah, I've been incredibly lucky. As I say, I've only ever worked for Bushmills, but I've worked for 3 different companies. So I don't know if that says something about me or 3 fabulous companies with all those characters that you mentioned. I've worked along with. Bushmills is a very singular entity in any group. I say we're a grain to glass distillery. So we have continued to do what we have done for centuries. I mean, our license to distill was 1608, so we've been making whiskey for over 400 years. So whenever I suppose it just doesn't really matter who owns us. We continue to create the whiskies that we've always created. I have to say, since Casa Cuervo took this over, innovation has been at the very, very top of their priorities. And it's lovely to be involved in that, to be allowed to travel the world looking at casks, to be able to create different whiskies. What we're looking at tonight that is part of the Causeway collection, which is a new collection open to the entire world. This is the one release. We actually have 2 releases for Ireland. This is one of them, but the rest of the world is getting different casks, all part of the Causeway collection. And it's really wonderful to be able to release these high-aged single malts at cask strength, no colour added, non-chill filtered, which has been something that people have been asking us for many, many years. And it's only now when we have managed to create the collection that we have released it.
Oh, you can see there's a fantastic color there as well on that. It's so hard to see. I'm not on my usual laptop this evening. So I'm there's a little bit of a difference in the setup and for me, but I don't know if you can see there's a fantastic color in that glass.
It's like rose gold. It's a very, very unusual color, because a lot of our colors are a beautiful sort of antique gold, golden colors, but the Muscatel is a really, really sort of rose color coming through.
We have a comment in here from Kevin Heather. He said, "Can we please taste it? The suspense is killing me." So I think for the fact that you've even held off in this long, Kevin, I applaud you. Perhaps Helen, we'll have a wee nose, a little sip, and I'll say sláinte, and maybe we can reconvene and talk about the casks that were used afterwards. But until then, I'll say sláinte.
Sláinte. So again, on the nose, typical Bushmills, that lovely malt coming through. But again, very unusual in that floral note, which is absent in any of the other Bushmills malts.
I'm actually very impressed that even from what I understand from a cask regiment, that this started in a bourbon sherry regiment and then went into the Muscatel casks for an extended, I'd say, secondary maturation or finish, depending how you want to say it. But even at cask strength, which with such a fantastic Muscatel finish, is still undeniably a Bushmills root beneath it. It's kind of funny because there's so much flavor, but yet in undeniably Bushmills, it hasn't been buried at all. It's very interesting. I'm seeing a lot of very pleased comments coming through here as well.
So it's all about having that Bushmills DNA, but creating layers of flavor that enhance the Bushmills signature house style, which is sweet and fruity. So it's actually getting those flavors to work together.
And forgive me if I'm wrong, this 2008 Muscatel cask release is Irish only exclusive. I'm pretty sure only released a couple of weeks ago, and as far as I'm aware, completely sold out. But this was kind of a parcel of, it was 4 Muscatel casks that were essentially parceled together and released. And I know the 95 was essentially a parcel of 5 of casks themselves. Were they parceled like that together in production, or is that just for the release?
That was for the release. They have been, the Muscatel itself, as you said, were matured in both bourbon and Oloroso. It was distilled in March 2008, filled into, as I say, bourbon and Oloroso, and then in actually St. Patrick's Day 2016, it was filled into the Muscatel cask, combined together, filled into the Muscatel casks, and then slept for the 4 years till it was as perfect as I think ever going to be, and then bottled at that stage. So it's triple distilled, triple wooded.
Fantastic. And for you, you know, I suppose it must be in one way fantastic to go from managing those stocks, going into the sensory lab, and now being on a 3 Drams webcast with the finished product, talking to all these lovely people around the world. That must be a great, I suppose, feeling in itself to kind of come to full fruition like that.
It's fantastic to see. All distillers, all blenders, all they want to do is to share their whiskies with people. And that really is what I've wanted to do with it. This entire collection for many years. I've been working on this collection for 15 years. And what you really want to do is to share it. But you've looked at these casks for year upon year upon year and worked with them. And it's all about the whole family process. At Bushmills, we talk about, you know, Bushmills being the people, the place, and the tradition. I'm incredibly lucky in that I get to work with real crafts people that, as we talked about before, have been at Bushmills for, you know, 40 years. The distillers that distill 24/7, the warehouse and cask handling team that work continuously to take the samples for me, even though they're at the top of the warehouse, at the back of the warehouse, and the bottling team. So it is all about a team to create a whiskey like this.
Absolutely. And for, I suppose, anyone who's seen the recent Bushmills bottles, the brand, I suppose, got a very nice, subtle but clean, crisp refresh. I wouldn't say rebrand, but a refresh, I think. And I for one quite enjoy that. And in some way, it kind of, to me, and forgive me if I overstep, but for me, it seemed as almost a fresh start rather than an inherited start in some ways. I know that you said that Bushmills is quite singular, but it seems now that it's very much the new kind of the refresh coming through, and I think it's quite a lovely package that it's coming through in. And as you said, there's so much new product development coming in line. I just think it just pairs so nicely with the new releases.
It's fabulous to see. We call it like the giant has been awakened, and we're creating some really, really new and exciting stuff that will come out in the next few years to come. But it's a fabulous time to be involved with Irish whiskey, and especially Bushmills, because all the time that we have taken and worked on is finally going to be released.
Perfect. So we are wrapping up, and guys, do get your questions in. But just one last question, I suppose. What was the motivation for bringing out the causeway collection to get these kind of single casks, or a single, not single casks, but single kind of releases out to the wider world? Is just to kind of show the world the kind of the strength and breadth of Bushmills today?
It really is. It's all about showing Bushmills at its very best. We have the largest amount of single malt on the island, and we have the largest stock of aged single malt. And it's really about showcasing the very best of what we have, and actually producing the whiskies that people have asked us for many years to create, and hopefully whiskies that people will enjoy.
Exactly. Well, Helen, thank you so much for your time. I know that people all over are enjoying, and this comment section is just exploding with people enjoying this. I know that the 2008 is unfortunately sold out at the moment. The 1995 is still available if people are looking to indulge in imbibing with themselves. But I like I said to Graham, I know that there's 1,001 things you could have been doing tonight, but you're here to sit with us, and I very much thank you for your time. For me, it's the first time to be able to interview you. It's an honor to be able to sit down with you. Thank you for sharing a dram with you. There is one question that has come through. I will ask: is Helen on Twitter, or is there a way to follow your exploits as you work in the distillery, or is it up to the mystique to find out as the release come out?
I'm all about the mystique.
Okay.
Again, the Bushmills Twitter feed will feature me at various times, but I'm more content in my warehouse and lab.
That's very fair. I know that there's lots of new product development coming down the line, and I know on the other side of the house there's, as far as I'm aware, some Sexton new product development coming down the line as well. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing all of that. But until then, a very big thank you, and very much appreciated to have you on this evening. I think we might have gone a little frozen there, and that's okay. So we'll be moving on to our next whiskey, the whiskey of the evening. I'm wondering, have I frozen? Now, we're moving on to the next whiskey of the evening. I had a whole little crash going on there. I'm not sure if it was my computer or what computer was going on, but I am delighted to introduce the final whiskey of the evening, a fantastic and fitting whiskey to, I suppose, bring the show to a close on something absolutely fantastic, new, and incredibly exciting, shall I say. I'm delighted to be joined by Master Distiller of Teeling Distillery in Dublin, Alex Chasko, to talk about the Teeling Blackpitts Peated Single Malt. So, Mr. Alex Chasko, welcome. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I apologize just at the end there. I'm not really sure we had a little technical hiccup, but we all came through. I'm not sure if I crashed or Helen crashed or what happened, but we're back. Exactly. And look, a little bit of whiskey won't hurt us along the way as we get there. We've had two fantastic guests this evening, and now yourself. Even this is probably
of course.
Exactly. So as we get started, I'm going to invite everyone to take dram number 3, Ever Tree, out of your little pack. If my camera can't focus on it, pour it in, nose it, have a little sip, but do save it because we're going to have a lot of fun talking to Alex here. And Alex, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Graham at the beginning, which is, with a man with such a musical lilt like yourself, how did you end up making peated whiskey in Dublin?
Well, I am not Irish, as my accent would allude to. Yes, so I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and the short answer to that story is my wife is Irish. That's how I ended up here. I started out as a brewer in Portland, Oregon, making craft beer. I worked for a long time at Bridgeport Brewing Company in Portland, and then at the Pyramid Brewing Company in Seattle. And then went and got my master's degree at Heriot-Watt University in brewing and distilling in Edinburgh. And one fateful night in a pub, met an Irish girl, and the rest is history. Yeah, so as John Teeling likes to remind me quite often, I'm in Ireland for lust. That's what brought me here, right? And I get to make award-winning Irish whiskey as a side venture.
That's your side hustle.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not having my lustful ways with my wife. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, look, there's worse things that could have brought you to Ireland. So surely you're honorary Irish at this point if you don't have a passport already.
It's been a while, in fairness, right? Yes. So I find that I use a lot of Irish terms and phrases, right, but still have the American accent there. Yeah.
That's okay. Listen, there's a lot of us that go abroad and blend the accents. So I feel you that you've kept the true accent going. I will say we're going to jump into a load of different things. I hope you don't mind. I do want to tell one story before we get going on, and I'm delighted to have you here.
Story, Matty, go for it.
There was so I remember back in probably 2014 or the end of 2013, I was selling Teeling whiskey. Yeah, let's just say I was selling Teeling whiskey out in Vancouver, British Columbia. back then when it was the kind of TWC going on. But I came home and I was just introduced to the Irish Whiskey Society, which is a fantastic way to get involved in Irish whiskey. And you were a guest. You weren't a guest at all. It was an entirely different tasting, but you were sitting in the audience. And I, as a wee little lad in 2014, came up to you, and you gave me all the time in the world, and I very much appreciated that time. And I remember asking you, with the distillery, it was just about to be, it was in the process of being built, and it was going to be released or unveiled and opened. I remember asking you at the bar, how were you going to, initially you were working with stocks that were triple distilled and double distilled, and now you were a distillery that was fully triple distilled, and how was that going to work out? And I remember you telling me at the time, and I hope you don't mind me paraphrasing you, but at the time I remember so confidently you were like, look, I might ruin 1 or 2 barrels getting it right. And he was like, and you said it'd be perfect. Jack and Stephen might hate me for the 1 or 2 barrels, but it'll never be wrong again. And I just thought that was a fantastic answer. And now we are sitting here with Dublin distilled, peated single malt.
The good barrels.
Yes, exactly. But I just loved at the time being able to sit down and again, as I said, I don't know what age I was, but was much younger than I am now, and I already look 16. So
I remember it well.
Well, I suppose my anecdote out of the way. Can I ask you for an anecdote? For those out there who are joining us for their first Irish whiskey tasting, and coming from an Oregonian who is very involved in the Irish whiskey world, what should people who are just dipping their toes in the Irish whiskey industry, I suppose, look out for or do, or what should they? What advice would you give them for dipping their toes in?
Tastings.
Sorry?
For the industry or for tastings?
No, for tasting. For people who are dipping their toes into tasting whiskey for the first time.
Irish whiskey pool there for the first time. Yeah. I'd say what's been holding you back? We're in a golden era of Irish whiskey at the moment. There's more distilleries, well, than there has been in a long time. There's more variety. There's more people doing new and unique and interesting things, and there's only more to come. So really, get started. Yeah, 3 Drams clubs like this are great. There's loads. I guess one of the positive things of the pandemic is that there's loads of online tastings, as you know yourself. And, there's lots of ways of getting involved, maybe not personally like the Irish Whiskey Society used to be, but, there's that opportunity to get out there and get involved. There's Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of different social media that you can do. And then I would encourage people to give it a try. You can do that either through bottle sharing or going down to your off license and actually buying a bottle of whiskey, however crazy that might seem. So I'd say welcome to the party. It's going well, and let's get started. Yeah. So
while everyone is I suppose tantalizingly nosing this, why don't we do a little nosing, a little tasting, and can you tell us about, I suppose, the mash bill that went into this? Was it 100% peated malt that went in? And I suppose, what is it like to a distillery that has to swap from peated back to unpeated malt? What are the kind of processes you have to look after there as well? So to everyone else out there, Sláinte, have a wee nose, have a little taste.
Nose and taste. I'd recommend giving it a little taste at the full 46%. And then if you want to add some water to it, please do. There's no right or wrong way to drink Irish whiskey. With the exception of maybe pickle juice. Don't put pickle juice in your whiskey. That's a bad. Don't go down that route.
You don't like picklebacks?
No, I'm not a big fan of the pickleback.
That only makes sense to American viewers.
But what I notice on that nose right away is there's a nice sweet fruitiness. There's a little hint of smokiness. I get that promise of a little bit of peat in there, right? It's not particularly smoky in the sense of like an Isla single malt, right? It's a bit more inviting. And then on the taste, I get a real barbecue, kind of smoky bacon, right? Grilled pineapple. That I remember when we were doing the tasting notes and emailing Jack, and he was like, "We need some tasting notes for this." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, great." And I just threw in grilled pineapple just because it was like Friday at 4 o'clock, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." And he came back with like grilled pineapple question mark. And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, I get it. I like it. Great." And now people are like, "I love the grilled pineapple." And I'm like, "That's brilliant, right?" Like that's because it is personal. It's a bit of fun. There's no right or wrong answer to it. How did we come up with the Blackpitts? We came up with Blackpitts. Blackpitts is the area right behind the distillery. I'm actually here in the distillery, believe it or not, right now. I'm in the control room in the heart of the Liberties at the New Market Square. And right behind us is an area of town that was known as the Blackpitts. And that's the area of town that would have had the maltings, right? Would have had the tanneries, would have had a lot of the industrial heart of Dublin going on. And it got that name of the Blackpitts from, I would imagine, a lot of the pollution and the peat and the turf that was being burned at the time, and those pits that they would treat the hides in during that tannery process. And we just liked the name. We thought it was a great name. And actually the printing of this was off of a gate that's right behind the distillery. We stole that, rightfully so, off the gate from the neighbors. Why did we make a peated single malt, though, right? The reason why we went peated, so this is the second whiskey that we've come out with from the new distillery here at New Market Square. The first was single pot still. Dublin as a brewing center, distilling capital, right? Known for its single pot still whiskey. We wanted to do that first, get that under the belts, right? And then move on to unique and interesting other styles of whiskey. And for me, the one that Ireland has always not been associated with has been peat. And really, as an American, kind of strange there, right? That there's so much peat on this island. And yet, for whatever reason, Irish whiskey hasn't been associated with that very distinct flavor. So we wanted to go to peat, and we wanted to do it in a unique and interesting way. And the way that we thought we could do that would be to triple distill it. So most peated single malts are double distilled. This one is the first that I know of. I can throw this out there to you, Manny. Do you know of any other triple distilled peated single malts out there on the market?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check a label or two, but I think you'd be on the button for the moment anyway.
Yeah, we'll go. We won't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Good story. I see you subscribe to my marketing manuals.
I get the newsletter, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so triple distilled, right? That's what Dublin was known for, was making triple distilled whiskey. And we felt we had to have it be triple distilled because we're here in the heart of the Liberties. And we wanted to make a peated single malt, but we wanted to stay true to that Dublin character, right? And the technical challenge of doing that is that the third distillation removes a lot of that smokiness, right? When you go from double to triple, you're bringing the peat level down quite a bit. So in order to get the 15 ppm of phenols that we have in this whiskey, we had to start out at 55 ppm of phenols, right? And that took a lot of courage. That took a lot of guts. I'll admit, I did the first, 2 weeks of making this single malt and was thinking, it's peaty, but it's not overly peaty. Like, it's not 55 ppm, right? Are we sure we want to do this? Do we really? And in fairness to Jack Teeling, he stuck to the guns, said, no, look, we're doing it. We know why we want to do it. We want to do it because we're going to bring out all of that fruit from the fermentation. We want to intensify all of those esters in the nose, right? But you get that. You get that lovely, fruity nose coming through that I feel that's quintessentially Irish. Like, that's what all three of these whiskeys tonight really have in common. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of questions here and asking. Well, first of all, I think one of the great things that this whiskey can do is not only appeal to the peat lovers of the country. There are multitudes of people commenting right now saying, I don't like peated whiskey, but I love this whiskey. And it's almost, the comment is the verbatim repeated by 10s and 15
Yeah.
and 20 and 30 accounts.
Right? It's the bridge. It's the gap. It's the thing that was needed in between. It's Irish, but it's peated. Yeah.
And then one of the things you mentioned there, you're starting off with 55 ppm, and after distillation, you're about 15 ppm. I'm aware that some people out there won't know what, I suppose, industry jargon goes for ppm. So we're talking about phenol parts per million, but how does it get in there, and then how does it get out of there?
All right. How does it? So parts per million, right, is like 1 in a million. You think of like a city of 1 million people, right? You are 1 part per million in a city of 1 million. That's so if you're talking about 55 ppm, we're talking about 55 Matts or 55 Alexes, right, in a town of or city of 1 million people. That's as complicated as it gets, right? It's just a fancy chemistry term. That's really quite simple. So we start out at 55 ppm, right? And then, sorry, what was the question was?
So it's just what does, like, so when you're saying like 55 ppm, it's a measurement scale of the peat in the barley, essentially.
The barley, yes. And that's coming from the smoke from the peat that's burnt, right? And that's during the malting process. So I don't actually burn any peat in the making of this whiskey. The turf is burnt when they're malting the barley at the malting company, right? That gets absorbed onto the husk, right? And what's amazing is that smoke that's on the husk while it's wet makes its way through the drying of the barley, right? The transport of it from the malting company to us, right? And then the milling and the mashing and the fermentation and the triple distillation, the 3 times that it's quite literally is vaporized, right? That smokiness continues to come over. And that's what you have there in the glass at the end, is that little bit of barbecue smoke that's coming from the turf that was originally used in the malting process. And
for me, I count myself very lucky. I got invited to a Teeling 200 Fathoms release back in 2015. And the day that the press junket was happening was a day that you were distilling peated malt. And the distillery was filled with this warm peat but like kind of malt barley smell, which was fantastic. And it was, of the many times I've been to the distillery, it was a trip to be able to be there. And usually you don't get the distillery smells until those doors open and you walk out into the distillery floor. But this encapsulated the building. From a production point of view, what do you have to do to mitigate that peat coming through in your next non-peated malt and pot still distillations? You have to do some half-peated distillations in between, or
half peat. That's the next one. It's going to be half black. It's going to be gray pits. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, in the beginning, I would have been very concerned about eliminating that smokiness. Yeah. But actually, what we found is within about 3 or 4 batches, it quickly dissipates. And so what we do is the last couple runs that go into the Blackpitts technically aren't peated, but still have the residual phenols that are working their way through. And after 3 or 4 runs, it's not there anymore. There's a person, there's a highly sensitive instrument that we have, and he's sitting here next to me in the room here. Owen Traynor Jr. is the man who hates peat. And so what we do is we when it's coming off the still, right? If I was to give this to him, he'd run in fear, right? And what we do is we give him the new make spirit 3 or 4 days after we've switched over, right? And if Owen says, that's good, I like that, then we know there's no peat in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I know you came from the craft beer world, and I always find it funny that some people might know I work in a distillery and a brewery at the same time, and when I'm not doing these tastings, and I always find interesting that diacetyl is an off note in the brewing world that you can be blind to. And our old head brewer was completely blind to diacetyl. He couldn't tell if there was there at all. But actually, our financial controller was incredibly tuned into diacetyl and hated it. So we'd have full sensory panels that will pass like 5 people, and we drop it down to him, and we call him the nose, and he would just go diacetyl. And you're like, he'd find the smallest drop.
Right? You know that it's diacetyl when Tom doesn't taste it at all, and Bill's like, "Holy Jesus, get that away from me!" Yeah, that's a key thing to have in a tasting panel. I think that's probably better than having like there's this term master blender and master distiller, right? The master blender isn't necessarily like, oh, you got the golden nose. It's that you've got the knowledge to know how to use all the different tools that are available to you. And some of those tools are, I don't smell this, or I don't, and like you were saying there with the tasting that you came into, after 4 days of being in here with the peated single malt going, right, you don't really smell the peat anymore. You become nose blind to it, right?
Yeah.
And so you do need to have different people as part of the process along the way to tell you, are you going the right way down the path or not? Yeah.
There are literally tons of questions coming through here and comments, and people are really loving it. I've kind of 2 main comments I've pulled, or questions I've pulled out. One of them is the cask regimen for this. We're looking at, if I'm not mistaken, bourbon and sauterne.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do want to get into that, but as far as I understand, I did a little bit of digging earlier on. And was cognac the original idea before the sauterne became?
Ooh, knowledge is a very powerful thing there, man.
This was volunteered by a Teeling representative as a question to ask you, so we can blame them later.
Okay, all right. I think I know who to go to on this one. Yeah, we've got quite a few different casks, right? We've got this in Pedro Jimenez casks in the warehouse. We've got it in Oloroso. We've got it in Sauterne. We've got it in Cognac. We've got it in probably, I'd say, a dozen different casks, right? And Sauterne came to the top because of a very special whiskey that we have in our history, the 24-year-old single malt, voted the world's best single malt. And that has a slight amount of peat in there, right? There's 5 ppm of phenols in the 24-year-old, and that has been finished in the Sauterne cask. And so we took inspiration from the 24-year-old and how we liked the combination of Sauterne, Sauterne being a French dessert wine that's very sweet, has a nice minerality, and is the finish that you're really getting off of that whiskey. That sweet coffee richness is coming from the Sauterne on here. I think that plays very well with the smoky barbecue meatiness that you get from the phenols in there, right? And yeah, it was the inspiration coming from the world's best single malt. And you got the world's best, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a younger, more aggressive brother of the 24-year-old here, right? He's got a bit more elbows on him. He's going to push you out of the way. He's not going to apologize for making a fool of himself, right? That's the Blackpitts compared to the 24-year-old. We do 1/3 matured in Sauterne cask, 2/3 in bourbon cask. The bourbon gives us that smoky backbone, gives us that vanilla honey sweetness. The Sauterne gives us that raisin, sultana sweetness, gives us that grilled pineapple, I feel, that you get there on the taste, right? And gives us that long finish that I think that the whiskey has.
Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted with this. I've a bottle. I had a bottle of each of the distilleries represented tonight, and my Blackpitts is definitely one with a big chunk taken out of it. For the actual peat that's used, and there's tons of questions about asking about the peat. I know that no commercial maltsters in Ireland are peating barley, and I know, and as far as I understand, that is a bane of your existence.
My hands out, saying, please, please make us some commercial, and they won't. I buy about 150 to 200 tons of peated malt every year, right? And for us, for you or me, right, that's a lot, right? I'm at 5 or 6 lorry loads of barley, right, peated barley. Too much for any one man, right? But on a commercial scale, very small, drop in the bucket. And in Ireland, most of the barley is going into, well, Guinness and Heineken, right?
Yeah.
And the risk of getting peat and Guinness and Heineken isn't worth it for the very small amount that I'm asking for, right? So we have to go to Scotland to get it. Nobody will make it because of the fear of contaminating their full production, all right? I would love it. I would be delighted if I could say that this was coming from peat from the hanging bogs of Connemara or the bog of Allen, or, you know, from the different parts around Ireland. It just doesn't, it's a dream. And I hope that one day that dream comes true. But the reality of it is we had to try and find what we felt was the closest match to Irish turf someplace else. And we thought that that was Speyside. We thought that the woody turf that you get up in Speyside was closer to the Irish turf that we wanted to use, but we couldn't get our hands onto. So we imported from Scotland.
That's very fair. Is this going to be a core release?
Yeah, this will be a regular product that we will have out. So first bottling was 5,000 cases. We're doing another one in the next couple of weeks here again. And I'd say we'll probably have releases of it 2 or 3 times a year, but it will be regularly available. 60 euros, we're practically giving it away at 60 euros, right? Available on the Teeling whiskey website and also at the Celtic whiskey shop, and all good off licenses, all good independent off licenses, off licenses around Ireland.
Yeah. And I was informed ahead of the show that it is yet to launch in Germany and the US, but it is on the way. So yes. I was
in the US in January.
Okay. I'm sure that'll be, you know, as the US goes, each state is like its own country. So sure it'll roll out as quickly as it can.
Well, it's the last election, but I'm sure it will be slow and arduous. Yes.
If it's as slow and arduous as the last election, Nevada will never get this whiskey. So I suppose for people out there that you know don't know, I suppose much about the Teeling whiskey range. Obviously, there's, you know, it's a very cool range of whiskeys. You've got 2 expressions coming from the Liberties now. Obviously, Teeling is very large in share of mind. The marketing that goes behind Teelings is superb. I noticed your classic Douglas bottle, which is most people will recognize from the rest of the range, just got a little emboss. I know that I think the date
a little bit there. Yeah, exactly. Very good eye there. Very good.
I'm an awful whore for branding. I saw as well did the date change as well with some of the malt now going into the small batch that comes from the Liberties.
A transition from the Teeling family reserve cask that we had when we started the company, right, to the liquid that's coming from the Newmarket Distillery. There'll be those slight changes with the emboss, deboss on the bottle, with slight changes on the labels. For 95% of the customers out there, I'd say that they won't know that there's any difference in it. But
that's why I wanted to bring it up.
What's that?
So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Give you kudos of the work that goes into it.
You've got some pretty good sources there.
Yeah. And even this bottle, like this is a screen print bottom label. Like that's, no one cares bar me, but like the work that goes into that, like to get the screen print on a bottom label, like
that's actually screen printed 3 times. There's you feel. I'm sure Jack Teeling would be delighted to have you feel the texture of the.
Yes, that's true. You got to go over it again to get the raised effect. If anyone knows what a punt is, that's important to get the bottom. Like this, no one cares about this stuff, but it is a beautiful bottle.
Unless, something goes wrong, no one cares about.
Exactly. And the little medallions on either side, I thought were a really good touch as well. I think it's a fantastic bottle, a very close but interesting departure from the Douglas bottle. And I suppose if people are, want to learn more about the Teeling, I suppose, brand and story, where would you send them? What advice would you give them? Is there things to look out for in your world?
To the Teeling whiskey. Oh wait, no, there's level 5 lockdown. We can't. Normally, I'd say come down to the distillery, right? Normally, in a normal year, we'd have 150,000 people coming through the doors of the distillery, going on tour 7 days a week. This, of course, is anything but a normal year. I would encourage people in the environment that we're in to go to the website. There's a lot of information available on the website. I would encourage them, if they have any questions, to ask on Twitter, on Facebook, to email. There's still people here in the distillery, right, that are answering questions. And we've got a specific limited release that we've had recently that you're interested in. Please, the people in the shop would love to take your calls and emails. I'm sure that they're hating the fact that I said that, but they really would. And I would also encourage people to get involved with groups like what we talked about at the very beginning of the Irish Whiskey Society, and the Cork Whiskey Society. There's other sorts of clubs and groups and people out there that are drinking Irish whiskey, experiencing it in a responsible way, that are more in it for the crack than the quantity, right? And people that are looking and nerding out on little things like the bottles and was this in what cask and what percentage, and there's all of that's readily available through the computer. So I would really encourage people to do that. Obviously, when the glorious day arrives that we no longer have to worry about COVID, please come down to the distillery. The distillery is built here as a touchstone for people to actually come and visit and to experience it. You know yourself, Matt, you've been here lots of times. I'm looking out there onto the production floor at the moment, right? There's the three sisters, the stills and the fermenters and the Laudertons running, and it's a real place where people can see and smell and hear and feel a real live working, operating distillery with a great tasting of Irish whiskey at the end of it. So please, when the time is safe and right, come back to us. We're here. We're waiting for you.
Yeah, and as one person pointed out there, crack not quantity is a great saying. You should patent that. Well, I want to say to you, Mr. Chasko, the comments have been fantastic. People are very much enjoying this, and as you're saying here now, the people praising the actual tour itself. I know people are very fond of the tour, and particularly Bang Bang Bar and
it's great, and it's great to have people come in and to have people say, this is great, I love it, or it's not my thing, I don't like it. Fine, like that's, people have their opinion, they're allowed to have that, and I am missing that element of the interaction. I used to have people coming in who just like hand you a bottle of whiskey. They'd say, I'm arriving from California, and this is the local whiskey from our distillery in Sonoma, and I wanted you to have this. And you're just like, all right, I don't know you from Adam, but thanks for the bottle of whiskey, right? That's great. Yeah.
I tell you one funny story of something like that. We had when I lived in the States and lived in Philadelphia, there was a very, very, very popular weekend neighborhood, and there was an Irish whiskey bar opening, or there was a whiskey bar, but it was an Irish theme. And there was a Californian wine bar opening in the same week. And the Californian wine bar was Soma. So you've got the Soma Valley for lovely wine, very famous. And the great thing was that some idiot decided to name the whiskey bar, which the way we'd pronounce it is Hona, which is happiness, but it's spelled S-O-N-A. So there was two bars opening about 5 doors away from each other. One was S-O-M-A and one was S-O-N-A. And it was the biggest confusion of the town. And I just love, and because I've been in distilleries where people,
right?
Sorry?
You couldn't make it up.
No, not at all. And people were like, "Why did you name it that?" And like, I look, it was just hilarious. But there was people coming in, and you just reminded me because the California Wine Bar did corkage, so you could bring in your fancy wines and sit down and talk to your friends about it. People used to walk into this hilariously like dark wood, dim lit whiskey bar with bringing in their own bottles of wine. They're like, "Oh, this is from my local town, and in Bend, Oregon," and you're like 3 doors down. Keep going. So no, listen, I've had an absolutely fantastic time tasting this. I think everyone else has as well. I'm hoping, and I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm sure we're going to see a lot more Liberties and new market releases coming out from the distillery in both Blackpitts and in other formats, and I'm looking forward to keeping an eye out there. No doubt it'll come out in the true Teeling fantastic fashionable style. But I want to say a very big thank you to you.
Wow, people with amazing whiskeys from Newmarket. So I'm looking forward to bringing that out.
And I suppose if anyone is looking to get any of the whiskeys we had tonight, with an exception to the 2008 Muscatel, because that is sold out, make sure to check out irishmalts.com, which is a fantastic global retailer. I think they ship to 32 states. And Alex, I know you'll agree with me that, as I said earlier,
you don't need to go to. Yeah.
No. But European wide all the way down to Australia, absolutely fantastic. And I know, guys, that if you have signed up, subscribed to the tasting tonight, there will be an email going out to you with some exclusive offers for the stores and things coming up as well. If you haven't signed up and are watching along, what are you doing? You didn't get to sit down with Alex Chasko and drink new market peated whiskey that I've almost gone through my entire thank God I have a bottle here. But sir, thank you so much. I very much enjoyed your time. As I've said, even more poignantly, you're actually in work while I've taken up your time. So I really appreciate you doing.
I'm waiting for the wash till the finish. We got 4% more alcohol to drop, and then I'm out of here. Yeah. And
then you're gone. It's home. How many fermentations are you getting out in a day in there? Just throw it in.
Two. We do. Yeah. So we have a total of 12 a week that we're doing at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. So take the Sabbath off, is it?
Exactly. We have to rest, at least partially. Right.
Very good. Well, speaking of which, you and everyone else out there, go and rest. Enjoy the whiskeys you have in your glasses. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know that the John O'Donovan, who has joined us from Irish Malt and 3 Drams earlier on, says a very big thank you to you as well. But until the next tasting, guys, keep an eye on your emails, keep an eye on Irish Malts, and basically keep an eye on what all these fantastic distilleries are doing, because very few other industries do you get to sit down with the makers and shakers like Mr. Alex Chasko. So one more time, thank you again, and good night. It's on.